So can everybody hear me? And you excuse my voice, I'm getting over a cold, which, either sounds rough and rotten or incredibly sexy. Take your pick. This panel is about, what gets you inspired and what keeps all of us writing. And I'm sure that all of these questions also pertain to a number of you here, a number of you who are writers and those of you who are attempting to enter the world of writing. And all of our panelists will have interesting things to contribute to this conversation. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves briefly so that we can get into the meat of the matter and have them tell you about their current book or what they're working on. So Anne Shade, we'll start with you.
Hello, Shade. Sorry. I'm Anne Shade. My current book is Securing Ava. It's out there at the Sapphic Lit table. It's a thriller, romantic thriller, my first romantic thriller. And I'm from the area. So if you guys are in the area nearby, DM me and maybe we could hang. I don't know.
And next we have Leigh Hayes. Excuse me, Leigh.
I'm Leigh Hayes. My first book, the book that I'm working on right now, or sorry, that I published is Foolproof, and it is set in Key West. It's about a rum distiller and a Coast Guard petty officer that meet in a contemporary romance. And I live in New York, but in the true upstate.
And at the other end, we have Kate Castle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Castle. I haven't got a cold. I'm just British. I'm a writer of young adult fiction, and my novel Girl Island came out about a year and a bit ago and won a couple of Goldies last year. I have 2 books in a trilogy of my next young adult fiction coming out this year, and I have a little foray into sapphic romance fiction coming out in the spring. So looking forward to that.
And Miranda?
Hi, I'm Miranda MacLeod, and I'm from Massachusetts, so a short drive here. And I generally write sapphic romance, although the book that's going to be coming out, hopefully in just a few more weeks, is a paranormal women's fiction, so something a little different this time, but yeah.
My name is Kate Rounds. My debut novel is Catboat Road. I hope to have another one out. I'm from Jersey City by way of Massachusetts, but I've been here a long time.
So thank you, authors, for your introductions. Excuse me. So we're going to start with our first question, and that is, what is your general writing routine? Do you prefer to work in the morning or the afternoon, or are some of you night birds in the evening? Do you need quiet? Or do you use music or other triggers? So if we can address that, let's start at the other end now. We'll start with Kate Castle.
Mine changes a lot, actually. I have a full-time job, so it's trying to fix it in with that time. So generally, if I have a lot on my mind with my business or family or everything else that's going on, I have to get all that done first because I can't concentrate on anything at all with my granny brain. And especially not creative writing. So I generally, I'll take Teddy out in the morning. I'll come back and I'll take care of my sort of day's work as much as possible. And sometimes that lasts all day. And then other times it might be an hour or 2, but I need to get that done before I can even think about clearing my head for some creative writing. But it's tricky, right? Because when you're in the zone of writing and you're having to go over what you produced the previous day or a couple of days before, it takes me a while to get back at that point again. So that's what I find the hardest, really. But juggling, everyday life is probably the greatest challenge, I think. What other questions did you ask? I've forgotten.
Well, you more or less answered it. For you, it's getting all your work done, your requirements done. So that could
I need a clear head. Yeah, you need to clear my in tray.
So does that usually happen by the time you can sit down to write? Is that usually in the afternoon or the evening?
Yeah, I like to try and sit down and write if I possibly can by sort of 11:30 in the morning. Sometimes it creeps into 1 or 2.
And do you
Sometimes
need-
it doesn't happen at all.
Do you need any triggers? I know some writers like to write with music either during their writing session
Oh
or.
gosh, no,
or-
my mind is far too busy. I need complete
Yeah.
quiet. And that's challenging enough in a house full of
Kids.
people and animals. Yeah.
Thank you, Kate.
You're
Miranda? What's your general writing routine?
Well, if I could, I would write first thing in the morning, because I like to kind of get up and get going on that. But it never happens, partially because I also, with TB, I run Sapphic, and we have 4 days a week, we have newsletters going out and we have new content going up on the website. So there's always, the first thing in the morning, like double check all the links in the post and make sure that the newsletters are set to go out and everything. So often that ends up lasting until at least probably 10:30 in the morning. And then it's from that point on. And because we do mostly co-write, our process tends to be, we'll talk about, so once the Sapphic work is done, we will have a Zoom call and we'll talk about what the day's chapter is going to be. So we'll maybe, it might start with reading what we did the day before or a few days before, depending on how busy everything else has been. But we'll talk about what's going to happen next and kind of go through the main points of the chapter. And then TB will, when we get off the call, she'll start by doing the first draft of that chapter. So she'll take, a bit of time, kind of just get everything down on paper, and then on electronic paper. And then it's my job after that to take it from there and go through and kind of do like a second draft version of that. And ideally we'll get through the chapter. I'll be able to turn it back over to her to read through again. And then we'll repeat it the next day. That's ideally what happens, but a lot of times what actually happens is it's much later in the day and we're busy and we have some sort of crisis comes up or we're running a sale and it takes longer. And so there's a lot of times that it's less than ideal. And definitely for me, I think for both of us, getting all of those details out of the way is very important, like all of your, daily work and household things and getting all of the emails answered and all of that. It's for a job that's supposed to be full-time. It's amazing to me how little of the time is often spent writing and how much is spent doing everything else.
Right.
And I personally, I need it to be quiet. And I don't like music, I do like music, but I don't when I'm writing, which is a problem because I have a neighbor that anytime it's warm enough to have the windows open, likes to keep a radio. And this is 2 houses down, but it is so loud. I can always hear it. And they actually keep the radio out on their porch and they keep it up. Yeah. So there are times when, sometimes when it's music, it's better because other times it is like sports radio or, but so having it quiet is great. But I think one thing I've realized over the years is having it ideal never happens. So
Thank you, Miranda. And Kate?
I get up every morning at 4 a.m. without a doubt, every single day, no matter what else is going on. But it's not such a great thing. I can't really help getting up at 4 a.m., but I always do it. So, and it's completely quiet, no music. And I also get increasingly dim-witted as the day goes on. So by the time my 2 o'clock panel comes, I'll be just like demented. So that's my process, and it's quiet and it's every day. Oh, coffee. I invested in an espresso machine. I make my own lattes and I'm really picky and they're great. So I don't think the 4 a.m. thing would work without the latte. It's like a combo thing. So that's it.
Put that there. Okay, Anne, Shade.
So once again, use the mic, Ann. So my routine is similar. I'm up on the weekends. I'm up at 5 a.m. I'm an early bird, have always been. I lived in a house with 5 other siblings, and you had to be the first to get in the bathroom. 4 of them were girls. So So I've always gotten up at 5 a.m. Then I went into the military, was up early. So I'm an early bird. On the weekends, that's when I get up and write. During the week, because I work, and I work from home 4 days a week. So I have my work computer and my personal computer. So I do this all day long. And when it's a really slow day, I just take the whole day just to write. Normally I need quiet, but recently, because I don't know, I've gotten burnt out with the romantic scenes. I've needed music, and one particular artist, and it's B. Steadwell. If I don't have B. Steadwell playing, I can't get that scene written. So that's the only time I listen to music, is when I feel myself stuck trying to write a romantic scene. So.
Okay, thank you, Leigh. And we'll talk more about that actually in our next question. Leigh?
I don't have a routine as well. I'd love to get up and write in the morning because I am a morning person, but I have a full-time job as well as a son. So when I do write, I can write with music. I can write without. Usually it depends on what's happening in the house. If there is shouting, I definitely have to have a headphone on. So, but yeah, I wish I had a routine, but I don't. What I do is try to keep my mind in the writing. So I'll do something that Heather Sellers calls surround sound. So if I'm writing about, say, NASCAR, I'm listening to NASCAR podcasts. So that sort of stuff. It keeps me writing when I'm not writing. So.
Thank you all. Well, now let's get into the meat of the matter. Let's get into the meat of actually writing these wonderful stories that these wonderful authors write. So the next question is, how do you get into your deepest emotional self so that you're able to experience and thus write from the emotions of your characters? Okay, since writing, if the reader can't connect with the emotions of the characters, they really can't connect to the book at all. So that question is, how do you get into your deepest self so that you are able to experience the emotions of your characters and thus be able to write from that experience of the emotions of your characters? And we'll start on this side. Anne, let's give it a go.
So my characters tell me what to write. I know my publisher hates when I say that because I don't come up with my stories. My stories come to me and they just kind of bounce around in my head. And as I'm writing it, my characters are talking to me and telling me their experiences. And so I start experiencing it through the character. Like, for instance, with Securing Ava, when I saw this picture, besides falling in love with her, I saw Paige and I saw her story and I heard her voice and I heard her telling me what needed to be, written. So I don't get into the character kind of gets into me.
Leigh, how do you get into your deepest emotional self so that you're open to your character's emotions and you can write from that point?
Well, that happens in the second draft, usually for me, after Barbara says needs more emotions. But what I've started to do is notice where she says that. So I stop and go, why is she nodding? What is she feeling underneath that? But I treat it very much like it's work. When you're at work, there's things you just got to do. So I sit down and I'm like, okay, what's this? Why is this happening? And I just kind of peel back at it as I'm uncovering it.
Thank you. And down at this end, we'll start with Kate Rounds at this time. We'll go back the other way.
I have something similar, which is when I'm working, I don't necessarily feel the emotion. I feel this sense of enterprise, like I have to do this. And the emotion will come from that. And occasionally, you are going back into things that have actually happened to you to feel the, I mean, I've cried while I was writing before, but that's not really where it comes from. And I'm not sure that I'm explaining this very well. So I'll have you talk about your emotions.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, generally, I have to agree that for me, it's not sort of in the process of writing it. It's not a first draft type of thing. A lot of it is figuring out as it goes on, what needs to be added here, what's missing, why is this character doing this? And sometimes if it's not if it's not really authentic, sometimes it's that, and TB will kill me over it, but it'll be where we're like 2 chapters ahead of something that has happened, and then I say, I just don't think that would happen, and we have to go back and fix it. And a lot of times for me, those realizations come when I'm doing something more mindless, like a lot of times it's like folding laundry or doing something where you're really not thinking about, like, I'm not thinking about the words. I'm not sitting in front of my computer. I'm just doing something else. And then like, oh, this is actually what would be better. This is how. So it's like, I think just that like busy work tasks is what often makes things connect more in my head. So.
And Kate Rounds.
Castle.
Kate Castle. I've got 2 Kates here and they expect me to keep it in order. Big one, little one. Big Kate and little Kate. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm definitely big Kate.
We can do British Kate and
British Kate. Okay. I come from probably a few different directions, actually. Girl Island was a deeply emotional book for me. It took me right back to my teenage years. And I actually went back to my old journals and read through everything and sort of got back in touch with little Kate, which was tough, very tough. And I tried not to write too much of the details because I wanted to channel the emotion into the character's actions more than anything, because it's a thriller at the end of the day. But there's definitely an emotional a vein that runs through it, and it came from very much of a painful place. So that was a tough, and there were various tough scenes that I had to really sort of remember what it was like to be a teenager and what it was like to experience that sort of toxic femininity that happened certainly in the 1990s when I was young. And then
I envy you being young in the 1990s.
And then from another perspective, the books I've been writing on recently, I'm very much into historical events, women events. So the books that are coming out this year is basically a modern or dystopian retelling of the witch hunts of the 15th century. So I went right back and went through the history of those young women and what happened to them, and the absolutely abhorrent actions that happened to these women. It's unthinkable. But the third thing that really happens is that what really happens for me is the characters always come first, before the story, before the ending arcs of the characters and where they're going to go. It always comes back to I get the character first, and the story always follows. So it's much like Anne was saying, once you've got the character in your head and you work out who they are as a person, and you attach different emotions to them, that can come from watching films or reading books for me, and I'll just gather information on that particular person, and suddenly they start to form, a whole self that I can then represent. But it is very much the characters start to do their own thing once you get yourself into who they are and what they've been through. Yeah.
Thank you. And something that you said about how the emotions guide the actions of the characters, that particularly resonated with me, especially you said it was a thriller that you were talking about. As some of you may know, I write crime and mystery fiction. And it wouldn't have any resonance with the reader at all if it was just this happened and this happened and this happened and who done it and all of that. I find that I have to have an emotional reason for the characters to do what they do and say what they say. So, and it has to come, I really have to dig down to find that emotion and then invest the character with that emotion. Or they, like Anne says, at some point they take over and they just tell me. And then I feel what they're feeling and I'm able to write what they're feeling. So what you said actually really clicked off in my particular process as well. So now that we've gotten that all established, let's move on to something even a little bit juicier. You're all ready for this? They're all going to hate me, but that's what we're here for. All right. Now, what methods do you use to write from the emotions of characters very different than you? For example, characters of a different race or a different sexuality or gender or class or a mental state or anything that is far removed from yourself. What methods do you use to write the emotional state and thus the actions of the characters that drive the plot of the book. So Leigh, why don't we start with you this time?
One word answer, research. That's all I do is I research it. You can learn a lot from, I mentioned podcasts. You can learn a lot from just reading, talking to people, except for I'm a huge introvert. So that's sometimes harder for me, but that's what I usually do is research.
And Anne, Shay?
I'm the same way, research. I talk to people as well. Just recently for the book I'm currently working on, I interviewed a dominatrix. I interviewed
That
a
must have been
burlesque
fun.
dancer. Yes, it was. We had a nice 3-hour dinner.
Care to tell us about that one? I'd be interested to hear.
So
I think we'd all be interested.
one of my characters is a dominatrix, and I know nothing about that, nowhere near it. So I needed to do research, and I prefer to talk to people directly to get a feel of what their life is like going through that. So I went on Pandora's Box, I think it's called. It's a place here in New York, over the river, and just looked to see if there were any African-American doms. Found several, found one that actually resembled the character, which freaked me out a little bit. And I found her on Instagram, and I do this a lot. I slide into people's DMs, tell them who I am, what I'm doing, give them links to all my books. They don't think I'm some creeper, and ask if they'd be willing to be interviewed. She answered right back. And we sat down for 3 hours to talk about how she got started, and why she's doing it now, why she continues to do it. I tried to put as much of that information into my character without actually making my character her. And the same thing with the burlesque dancers. I contacted some burlesque dancers, went to a burlesque show, and just to see how that.
That must have been fun. We all want to hear about that.
So if you want a really good dinner and a really fantastic burlesque show and want to spend $145 per person, then go to Dwayne Park. It's over the water. You know Dwayne Park? Oh, yes.
That's Aurora Ray, by the way.
The other
If
place,
any of you want to contact.
City Winery also has burlesque nights. So City Winery is right there at the, what is that? The building right off the water. Hudson Yards, yes. So they have, so I went, that was a wonderful, the one at Dwayne Park was awesome. The character that I've created actually is now a dancer at Dwayne Park, but it's called something else. So it's very, very nice. The food was awesome, but it's $145 per person. So, but as I was saying, I interviewed several burlesque dancers. And they were all African-American burlesque dancers, and found out some very interesting things about how the diversity is not as prominent as you would think, especially considering how burlesque dancers were very prominent in the 1920s and, you know, African-American ones. But that's how, I didn't mean to take all that time. That's how I do my research. I research and I talk to people.
Well, we know Anne's book's going to sell like crazy out there. Just saying. Okay. So to restate the question, how do you write the emotions and the lives of people very, very different than you? It could be different race, different class, different mental health state, anything, sexuality or gender. How do you find their emotions to write about them? So Miranda, why don't we start with you?
Okay, clearly I'm not doing the right kind of research. So I'm making some notes, but yeah, I mean, I do like to know as much as I can about whether it's a place that the person is living, or watching TV or movies about the types of people reading books, memoirs. And then as far as just keeping it in mind for me, for a character, I like to write just a few notes, sometimes just on a note card, and I'll have like 5 bullet points of just like, remember these things about this person, so that as I'm going through and writing a scene, I can look and say like, did I remember that they, that they're thinking like this, or like, just a note of like, they're going to be angry, or they're going to be not trusting or something like that. Just like things that would be on their mind that maybe because I'm not them, I would not be too concerned about, but I need to remember like, okay, if this person had a bad thing happen to them and it makes them not trust a person, like they're going to hold something back. They're going to be, they're going to tell a lie here, or they're going to, and so that those just like things to remember, it makes it easier then to get off track with it and then have, a beta reader come back and say, well, I don't think that they would do this. And then it's like, well, why do you know my character better than I do? That's not fair. And you're right. So.
And Kate, British Kate.
British Kate.
British Kate.
Yeah, you're okay. Same overall answer as research.
Yeah.
But I have a funny thing about attaching various characteristics, specific characteristics to people. So in Girl Island, every character represented an element. So I started by breaking down which each element represented and then attaching that to a character, and then researching people with those sorts of characteristics in their personalities, people I might have known in my life, or famous people. And then you start to sort of, I start to get a whole picture about who that person is and reflect it. And then in the books coming up, every character represents a different bird.
Oh,
So,
right.
so I researched birds, and and it's really interesting how different birds are. So that's a nice activity for me to do, and to be able to sort of differentiate between characters and really feel like I know who each person is by what they represent and how I've broken it down. And eventually they're fully formed characters I don't even think of as birds anymore. But the overall ending thing is research and, past experiences, people we know, parts of us, very much parts of us, I'm sure, sent through books, and that becomes much easier to write, especially when you write first person like I do.
And passing to local Kate, Jersey Kate.
I like to avoid actually straying too far afield because I don't feel really comfortable with it. But that said, I did have a 17-year-old narrator, so that required me to interview. And also, everybody here has talked about research. I actually don't like research. I come from a journalistic background. I have enough of that. I really don't want to do it, seriously. So hats off to all you guys who also do historical research and so on. So basically, it's a matter of language. And I used to commute on the light rail, and I would be on the train with a bunch of high school kids. And you better believe I was listening to everything they said. And then sometimes I had to Google what they said. I know what the hell they were talking about sometimes. So that's kind of it with me. And the rest of the characters come, from me. I know, something, people I know myself. No, I don't know myself, but they come from that kind of thing. So that kind of says it for me.
Thank you. And moving on to a question that some of you might find interesting. We all write sometimes characters that we don't like particularly very much. So how do you stay engaged with characters who you don't like, or worse, characters who may bore you, but they are important to the story? So how do you keep a storyline moving if you get stuck, especially if you're writing a scene with a character who you really don't like, or worse, a character who bores you silly? So, Anne, Shade, let's start with you. Although in your book, I don't doubt seriously none of those people are going to be boring, but you never know.
They may know boring people.
They may know boring people.
I had that experience writing Love and Lotus Blossom. I couldn't stand the mother. and it to the point where writing her stressed me out because I didn't like her. And I thought she was just a mean, spiteful woman who just needed to disappear. But it was crucial.
Did you turn her into a murder mystery and kill her off?
No. It was important for her to be that way because of how it affected the character's growth, because it was a coming out and coming of age story, how it affected the character's growth. If her mother wasn't such a bitch, then she wouldn't have turned out the way she was and wouldn't have gotten past the things she needed to get past in order to be who she was. So it's it's sort of fun writing a character you don't like, but it also kind of annoys me because I want to just write them and then put them away. But she had to be out throughout the whole book. So you just deal with it.
And Leigh, how do you deal with characters who either you don't like or who bore you?
Well, if they're boring, I find something to make them interesting or I cut them. But if they're, if I don't like them, everybody comes from somewhere. So you got to figure out where they're coming from and at least empathize with that piece of it. And then you'll be able to understand why that person is the way that they are. So that's how I do it.
Okay. And let's say Jersey Kate. Why don't we start with you? Jersey Kate. Jersey Kate. We like that.
Actually, this gets to something that I'm really bad at, and most of my editors have pointed this out. I'm not really good at tension. My characters seem to be like hapless do-gooders, you know, like they don't know what the hell they're doing, but they're not doing anything bad, or they don't know they are. So that's kind of always where I am, which is not the best place to be. So you really need to, I need to think about tension. I don't think, I agree with whoever talked about, well, if somebody's boring, I think the boringness would come out in dialogue. You know how boring we all can be when we're talking. So I think that's a way to present boredom. In terms of not liking somebody, that's not really, it's something that I need to work on. So hopefully I can learn from all of you guys about having a little more tension.
Miranda?
Yeah, I think if a character is too boring and has more than a small role, usually it means that they need to be made more exciting in some way. So that's how I'll deal with that. Or I just procrastinate until I come up with a way to fix it. As for a character I don't like, if possible, I find a way to punish them in some way, usually. I think TV and I have had a few books now where we weren't really sure where we were going with an ending, but if we had a character throughout that we were like, you know what, I hate that character, like that is a terrible person. Like, well, the end is coming on this book. Like, can we punish them in some way? Is there a way to make something like, can there be divine justice that will take them out? And if possible, I mean, it's really satisfying. So but yeah, otherwise just knowing that they serve a purpose in the story. Like if they have to be horrible, they're there for a reason. So it makes it easier to, and then if they have to be horrible, like, can they be worse? And that's, yeah. And then can you punish them more for being as bad as you made them?
You should speak to Anne Shade with the dominatrix stories. And British Kate finishing up that section.
Yeah, I can't write boring characters. I'd have to get rid of them. It just wouldn't. Doesn't float my boat at all. When it comes to nasty characters, I've written a fair few of them. And
but do you like them?
No, I try and the thing about how I write is I want to make people feel like they really hate that person. That's the point. It's evoking emotion, right? So, and especially with a book like Girl Island, the whole premise was very much, how do you explain how people can descend from being fairly decent to completely out of control and able to seemingly do anything at all? And I almost want the reader to go on that journey and get to the point where they think, well, I could really hurt this person. That's the point, is realizing humanity has its or doesn't have its limits. So to help me get there was very much a binary process. I went back to the early days of those very nasty girls, but at the same time, I now know these girls in their 40s and 50s, and we all suffered when we were young, and I'm friends with some of them. So you can give them a more rounded character by backstory, or who their families are, and you can explain that in the story to somehow explain their behavior away. But at the same time, I really like taking the reader on perhaps an uncomfortable journey in places, because life isn't easy.
No, which leads to another question. When you're writing these characters, it's one thing to write characters that you really like. that makes you feel good. But how do you feel when you're writing a character who is perhaps, for purposes of the story, evil, monstrous, or, just really not likable at all? What I want to know, this question is not what you do or how you write them, but how does that make you feel when you are writing them? So why don't we start with Ann Shade over there?
I mean, I don't feel any particular way in how, in writing them. I have to dislike them in order for someone else to dislike them. Like Kate said, if you want someone to dislike your character, if you want to make an evil character, you have to make sure, I mean, if you're liking your character and you're evil, it's like you're not doing the right thing. So
Some of us write crime and mystery fiction and love our nasty killers and
well,
killers.
okay. Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense because that's your nasty character. But for me personally, I have to not like the character, and I know if I don't like them, then someone else isn't going to like them. So, I mean, it's like, and sometimes you do have a villain that you kind of sort of feel something for, like, I forgot her name. Maleficent. I love Maleficent. She's my favorite villain, but only because circumstances made her evil. She didn't just come out evil. So that's the type of character that, I would like that character.
And Leigh, how do you feel when you're writing a character who is essentially not likable or even monstrous?
I try to avoid writing characters like that. I find most people are redeemable. I think, I don't write crime fiction. I enjoy watching it and reading it, but I do love a good villain. I definitely love a good villain, but I don't write villains. So I just write people.
And Jersey Kate, how do you feel when you're writing someone who is not likable? I mean, because after all, we've created these monsters. So how do you feel when you're writing them?
Comedy is a big part of my debut novel and everything I'm working on now. So I would probably make them kind of foolish, something that, people could laugh at. And again, through what they say, I think would be the best way to expose whoever this is. And a lot of times they're ludicrous. So let them be ludicrous.
Miranda?
Yeah, well, other than punishing them, which, knowing that I've got that coming, that's a good feeling. But yeah, I think I feel like if they're believable, that's what I'm going for, is that if I don't like them, then other people won't either. But I know that in my own work and even just like reading other books or watching movies or television, it's often, the character that you hate so much, and then you find out something about them that makes you just either feel sorry for them or it explains so much. And which is kind of uncomfortable sometimes because you're hating a character and then it's like something explains it. And then you feel almost bad that you hated them because, like it's like, oh, it's not their fault. Oh, no, now I'm the bad person for hating them and then wanting to punish them. But yeah, no, I think everything, like as long as the character is serving whatever purpose they're supposed to serve in the story, like I feel pretty good about it. So if they're supposed to be evil and then they're really evil, then I did a good job. So if they're only like partially evil and they were supposed to be really evil, then they need to be made worse. So.
And British Kate?
I find it really, really, really hard to get into the mindset, which is ironic because I like writing conflict. But I suppose
you find it hard, but do you do it? Can you do it?
I can do it, but with my characters, that the thing about girls is, or teenage girls, certainly back in the early 90s, was, in my experience, it wasn't out and out hard evil, is between the lines. So finding those nuances in a character where any woman reading it knows exactly the sort of girl that we're talking about, and how that toxic behavior sort of seeps into groups, and how it's done really very much between the lines and is built over. So that's a real challenge when I know the character is a horrible character, but having to reveal them in a sort of slow manner that people recognize, okay, I remember these girls from school, you know.
Mhm.
It's a real challenge, because you almost want to be overly dramatic and sort of reveal them to be this monster straight away, but that's not real life, you know. And that's how it wasn't like that, you know, is that they gradually wear you down, these people. So,
Yeah.
and they have their reasons for doing it. So you have to explain that as well in different ways, you know, and give them a rounded character and not just make them the bad guy. Right. So it's a real challenge, but it's one I weirdly enjoy.
So, not so weird. Not so weird. So was it, considering all the things that we talked about, you know, the emotional state of you, the emotional state of your characters, was it easier or more difficult to sort of focus, to get into the zone for this particular book? So British Kate, why don't we start with you?
Much same as last answer, really. I mean, I going through journals really helped, and how those behaviors impact on you, and trying not to sort of caricature them was a really big thing as well, because it's very easy to do that. Just try and keep the nuances so that again the reader makes up their own mind. You're looking to take the reader on a journey and to make them feel these things without telling them. You're showing them, not telling them, right? So that it's basically just that. It all drives from character for me. Everything I write drives from character. So once I have the characters in my head, it becomes fairly straightforward. It takes me a long time to get there, though.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's how I operate.
Yeah. Miranda, was it easier or more difficult for you to get into the zone for your most recent book?
You know, it was easier for an interesting reason, I think, because with this most recent paranormal women's fiction, this was a series that started off. This was something that that I wrote under a different pen name in a different genre a number of years ago, and in that version of it, there was a young character. She was in her 20s, and she's, you know, very far removed from where I am in my life. And so a lot of the storyline, TB and I decided we were drawing from that, but we were completely reimagining this character as an older person, you know, in her 40s, in like life circumstances that were a lot closer. They felt more like my own life and people that I know well, close to me. So it was a lot easier for me in this way to take a story that a lot of the details remain the same. Some of the details change. But to make that character a lot closer to where I am in life, closer to my own age, closer to my own like life circumstances and things. For me, it was a lot easier, and it was an interesting thing to kind of imagine, like, oh, I'm not this 27-year-old anymore. What is the character going to do closer, still younger than me, but closer to my age. So
thank you. And Jersey Kate?
This is my first published book. That's not to say I haven't written many others that are in the drawer that nobody paid attention to. But I think getting into the zone is weirdly connected to the very first question that you asked, which is, what is your what is your rhythm? How do you write? And I said at 4 a.m. in the morning. So if it's 4 a.m. and I'm in my bed with my laptop, then I must be in the zone. That must be where I am. It's sort of like that. And there is a sense, if you're in the zone, that when you're done with the book, there's a sense of grief a little bit, I think.
Thank you. And Shade?
For securing Ava, it wasn't difficult to get in the zone because it's something I haven't written before. So it was fun, and challenging, something new to do. I'd never done a romantic thriller. But since I had Paige so rounded out at that point, by the time I really started getting into the meat of it, it was fun kind of like seeing who I could put against her and someone who was her complete opposite. And so finding that kind of opposites attract thing going was fun. So I stayed within the zone on that one. My current one, I'm like in and out. So
what do you do to keep yourself in there?
I have to step away sometimes and maybe work on something else, or even just read someone else's book just to get my head out of my own book. And that's been happening a lot with this current one. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know if it's because it's number 8 and my head's like, you've written enough. But it's staying in the zone has been difficult for this one. So we'll see how it turns out.
Leigh, and how do you keep yourself? Was it easier or more difficult to get yourself in the zone for this book?
My first 2 books came out in 2020, and something happened in 2020, and I work information technology, so I was busy by the time I was looking at my 3rd book. So it took me a long time. To decide what I was going to write. So what I sometimes do is allow myself to do what somebody has called sexy new book, and I play around with it for a little bit, and then I figure out which one I want to spend a year with, and that's how I get back into the zone.
So we have 5 minutes, and I'd like to open it up to the audience. I'm sure you're all dying to ask the authors a question. So if anybody, do I see a hand? Cindy, thank you.
This is a little similar to what that last question was, but even more so. What happens when you're really stuck? You're not writing, you should be writing, asking children. And the excuses are like, I'm just so busy doing my job or doing it, but it's not really those things. It's like you're not writing. What do you do if that happens to you?
Are you asking anybody in particular?
I call Aurora Ray and she kicks my ass.
And may I answer that question? Because that happens a lot between one thing and another. And guilt. Really, guilt. For those of you who don't know me, my background is, now this is really going to get you, I'm 3/4 Jewish and 1/4 Sicilian, which means that I am guilty of everything. Same. Yes. Cindy and I share this. Yes, absolutely. Although her last name is more reflective of it than mine. But unfortunately, guilt somehow it doesn't rule my life every day, needless to say, but it does have some sort of cultural place in me. And when I'm not writing and I know that I should be, it comes roaring up. It absolutely comes roaring up. And I sit down and I find once I'm in there, once I start writing, then it's okay. But sometimes to get there, it's, I hear my mother and other assorted people who, thousands of years worth of culture is going like this. And so does anybody else have it? How do you, what do you do? Yeah. We have 2 minutes. So.
Only because I saw that amazing Roxanne Gay in London last week, and she was just incredible. And she said something that really resonated with me, and I'm going to take it forward because I'm a terrible procrastinator. And I do sit my ass in the chair every single day, just try. And even if it's complete crap, you can edit crap, you can't edit nothing. So, but Roxanne Gay said, and this is what I'm really guilty of, is rather than thinking I've got to write the book, I've got to write the whole thing. She says, I write a word, and then I write a sentence, and then I might write a paragraph. Yeah. And if I'm lucky, I might reach the end of a chapter, but you start with the word and the sentence.
I like that.
And it really hit home.
Yeah. Miranda?
I end up with a really clean house, and usually like maybe a new recipe that I try out or something. But yeah, it's like as long as I do something.
Can I come over to your house and take you?
Yeah, things are going badly when it's like I clean the shower. So, but yeah, it's like well, I didn't write, but I did do something.
I like the recipe part. That's what I want to come over.
It's like, oh, look what I made.
And Kate?
Just the same thing. I just sit down and write, like the word, whether I like it or not, I just do it. Just write it. I don't know how else to say it. I think you said it best, Kate, or Roxanne said it best. Yeah, Roxanne said it best. Yeah, right.
So everybody, we've come to the end of our time here. If we have time for maybe one more question, anybody? We have all these marvelous authors here. If not, I bid you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much or morning still. Thank you so much for attending our panel. And we'll all see each other at other panels as the day goes on. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.